Announcers are pretty commonplace in multiplayer video games. Those faceless voices that I'm sure you can identify at least a handful of games that have fairly prominent ones. Smash Brothers, Overwatch, Fortnite. The good version, and of course TF2. TF2 was graced with the presence of the Administrator, who turned out to be a very integral part of every single match that every single player plays. Before we get into the Administrator's effect on an in-game match, I want to state that I won't be discussing her actual character and in-lore effect too much. Not only is this video meant to discuss her effect on a match and its players, but I've previously made a video that extensively looks over the Administrator's in-universe lore, so if you're interested in that, just click the convenient card I've so lovingly placed in the top right corner. Or you could be a big kiddo and look it up yourself. So, a quick rundown of who she is. The Administrator, also known as the Announcer, is the faceless voice that screams at you in-game and relays important information about the match. You failed! In lore, she oversees each match between Red and Blue, and commentates for both sides, essentially playing devil's advocate. This explains why both teams hear announcements from the same person, but are different depending on which side the player is on. For example, if you're on Blue pushing the payload to the final point, she will scream in slight, joyful anticipation that the cart's almost there.
The bomb has almost reached the final terminus!
But if you're defending on Red, she'll state that the cart is almost at the final point with spite and disappointment laden throughout her words.
The bomb has almost reached the final terminus.
Her role within the game is pretty common knowledge to players though, since she's one of the first things you hear when you boot into a new match, aside from the mercenaries' various screams of excitement. Now that we've got the introduction to the Administrator's role out of the way, let's talk about exactly what she tells the teams. Since she has multiple voice lines for the same thing, I'll just quickly list out what she'll commentate in a standard game. The Administrator will announce the beginning and ending of each match, complete with countdowns. When time has been added to the round, when you win or lose a match, sudden death being activated, a control point being contested along with one that has been captured or lost, same goes for the intelligence, when the intelligence has been returned to either bases, when a payload is nearing a checkpoint, when the teams have been scrambled, when a control point unlocks, and the first blood in an arena match along with if a team wins or loses without losing a single teammate or killing a single enemy. From a simple glimpse of the list, you can easily tell the Administrator has a very active part in the game, and this doesn't even encompass her special callouts for certain game modes like MVM and Special Delivery. The Administrator's job is to convey information about the round, and she does a fairly extensive and solid job of doing so. TF2 is chocked full of hundreds of character voice lines, and the Administrator is thankfully no exception. However, simply saying important information about a match isn't exactly enough to say she's doing her job well. There are many other games out there that have announcers in them that function similarly to the Administrator, but most of them just don't work as well as she does. The question here is, what makes the Administrator such a good and effective announcer? Considering the role of an announcer is usually a faceless role during the game, the vocal performance is incredibly important in the success of an announcer. Here, Ellen McLean does a fantastic job at conveying the Administrator's spite, apathy, sternness, and joy at the face of seeing mercenaries kill each other, despite the fact that you never do see her in-game. The emotion, or therefore lack of emotion, in her voice does wonders. When a match gets down to the bone, when the last control point is close to being captured or the time is running out, the Administrator usually really gets into it. The urgency in her voice increases and it signals to the player that they have to shift into high gear to get their objective done. A good example of this is the differences between her match start countdown and her match end countdown.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1!
Her in-match countdown has much more excitement and teeth-clenching action thrown into it. Additionally, I'm sure we're all aware of the magic of overtime when a team who's just failed to push together and break through the enemy's defenses manages to magically work together as one and masterfully makes the one last push that ends up being successful. It happens in almost any game with overtime, and the Administrator makes sure you know this is your last chance.
Overtime!
I believe that the urgency in the Administrator's voice lines help activate the overtime magic. Having a crotchety old lady scream at you certainly gets my legs moving and gives me the temporary skills of a competitive god. Now, something I realized when researching for this video is that the Administrator's interest in a match almost seems based on the game mode. Of course, overall her interest is based on how much action is going on and if the match is getting down to the wire, but if you actually listen to her voice lines meant for capture the flag as opposed to payload, well, just take a listen.
Success. We have secured the enemy intelligence.
The cart is nearing a checkpoint.
It's almost like capture the flag. It's a much less exciting game mode. All jokes aside though, I would have originally said this was due to the fact that the two game modes came out at separate times, meaning the voice lines were recorded at different points in the games, as well as the character's life, but it's not just payload that seems to have more excitement in. Control Points was also a launch game mode, and her voice lines used there just seem more invested.
Alert! The final control point is being contested.
This is fascinating to me because it's common knowledge that game modes like King of the Hill, Payload, and Control Points have much more excitement thrown into them. They're faster-paced game modes with much more action than CTF, and it's honestly kind of hilarious that the administrator's responses reflect this. She just straight up sounds bored in Capture the Flag, like a majority of players who play that mode, and I can't blame her. The other game modes have much more action to both watch and commentate on, and the administrator is well aware of this, hence why she's not only more active in her announcements in other modes, but also because it's much easier to get invested in. Aside from the delivery of her lines and the information she blathers out, the administrator's voice is also important and well implemented due to two other aspects of it, the way her voice is filtered and her gender. Now let me explain. The administrator's voice has a very distinct filter used on it. This filter allows players to easily recognize that it's not a teammate's due to the fact that it clearly sounds as though it's being heard from far away and out of a speaker. All the mercenaries have very clear voice lines. A big difference between the merc's voice lines and the administrator's is that the volume of the mercs depends on how far away you are from that mercenary that's saying it. The administrator doesn't have this aspect to her voice lines. They are always the same volume no matter where you are on the map. As for the second aspect, it's important to note that the administrator was the only distinctly female voice within the game for years. Because of this, her voice cuts through the manly voices of the 8 or 9 mercenaries within the game. Even when Miss Pauling got added as the contract giver, they made sure to make her voice easily identifiable from the administrators.
Sniper, Pauling. What's that sound? Are you peeing in a jar right now?
Not only are their voices in completely different spectrums of tone, pitch, and personality, but Miss Pauling was given a completely different filter on her voice lines, which just solidifies that the two are completely different people that can be easily distinguishable from one another. Now, this wouldn't be a video about how well the administrator fills her role if I didn't make a direct comparison to a game who has a voice that fills the exact same role, so say it with me,
Overwatch.
I need to note that I am using Overwatch as a comparison due to my personal experiences with the game. I know there are other games with comparable announcers, but they aren't ones that I can talk about in confidence, so I decided to go with the one that I could. Originally, I was going to go in depth as to why Athena fails as announcer in Overwatch, but because I want to keep this video mostly about the administrator, I'm just going to give you guys the bullet points instead. Athena doesn't announce near as much as she should, such as a point being captured or the very end of a round. The end of round countdown is left to music, which can be disabled in the options and really hurt someone's game. Her character being an AI makes it so that she's very calm and emotionless, meaning there's no variation in her lines. A more calm and collected announcer makes sense, however, when considering the tone of the game, but it just makes her role as an announcer seem very disinterested and honestly very easy to forget she's even there. Her voice isn't as distinguishable and unique as the administrators due to the current cast of 29 varied heroes. It doesn't necessarily get muddled in with the rest of the characters, but I have my concerns with this happening once Echo gets released due to their very similar voices. If you're curious to read my more fleshed out version of this section that I originally had, I'll leave a link in the description to a Google document that has my whole spiel about Athena laid out. But since this was a video focusing on the administrator, just by looking at another game, I think it's fairly easy to see how exceptional of an announcer she is. She goes beyond simply just relaying basic information such as the fight has started and the fight has ended, which is somewhat ironic considering she just comes off as this uncaring woman who hates everything about the mercenaries. Then again, she's in it for the money like all old cranky women, just like me.